Usually when you get a medical diagnosis, you expect a certain level of, engineering precision.
Oh, definitely. You want a clean answer.
Right. Like, you break your arm, the X-ray shows a jagged white line on a black background, and the doctor just points to it.
And says, yep, that's broken.
Exactly. The path forward is obvious right there. You put a cast on it, you wait 6 weeks, and you're healed. We really crave that binary simplicity,
Yeah, we want our problems to be visible, neatly categorized, and fixable with a straightforward protocol.
But the moment you step out of the orthopedic ward and into the landscape of human psychology, into our deep-seated instincts and our evolutionary drives, that X-ray machine just completely shatters.
It shatters into a million pieces because suddenly you aren't looking at a clean break anymore.
No, you are looking at a diagnostic landscape that is incredibly murky. It's this weird place where the thing keeping you alive might actually be the very thing slowly killing you.
Which is, it is the ultimate diagnostic paradox. We are examining an aspect of human nature that operates completely under the radar for most of us.
Because it's disguised as a virtue.
Exactly. It is disguised as the ultimate virtue. We are looking at the instinct for self-preservation. On the surface, nothing could be more logical or biologically necessary than the drive to secure your own life.
It's literally hardwired into us.
Right. And yet, what's fascinating here is how, when you analyze the texts we're exploring today, texts that span entirely different civilizations and eras, you uncover this terrifying consensus.
Yeah, they all pinpoint the exact same problem.
They do. They all identify a specific threshold where the drive to survive metastasizes. It stops serving your life and actually begins to suffocate it.
And that is the core question we are going to ring out today for you, the listener. We're pulling from a wildly diverse stack of source material to do this. We've got ancient wisdom from first century Judea, specifically looking at the teachings of Jesus in the Gospels of Matthew and John, along with the Apostle Paul's letters.
Which are foundational texts, obviously.
Absolutely. But then we are cross-examining those with something completely different. The Hagakure.
Ah, yeah, the Hagakure.
Right, it's this classic text from Edo period Japan that captures the philosophy of the samurai Yamamoto Tsunetomo. At first glance, you might think a first-century carpenter and an 18th century samurai belong in completely different conversations.
You'd think they have nothing in common.
Right, but they are diagnosing the exact same psychological phenomenon. So, as you listen today, the mission of this deep dive is to hold up a mirror to your own life. You need to ask yourself, does your need for security still serve your life, or has your life begun to serve your need for security?
To unpack that, we really have to start at the biological baseline. The instinct of self-preservation is fundamentally a good, necessary power.
It's not inherently evil.
Not at all. And I think this is where a lot of people misinterpret ancient ascetic traditions or religious texts. When they hear a phrase from Jesus like, whoever wants to save their life will lose it, they filter it through this lens of, extreme self-denial.
Yeah, they assume the text is glorifying recklessness or demanding that we just despise the physical body and welcome danger.
But if you actually analyze the philosophy presented in the sources, it is entirely grounded in the goodness of life. Taking care of your health, securing an income, locking your doors at night, fixing a leaky roof, these are not signs of spiritual weakness.
Right, they're just basic life skills.
Exactly. They are the baseline requirements for stewarding the gift of existence. The nervous system is designed to warn us of danger so we can act carefully and protect ourselves and our communities.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because the line between healthy self-preservation and, destructive obsession is razor thin. It's the difference between building a house to keep the winter out and building a bunker that you never actually leave.
That is a perfect analogy, the bunker mentality.
Because I look at modern society, and we are so obsessed with optimization. We have apps tracking our REM sleep, our blood glucose, our heart rate variability. We have entire industries dedicated to extending our lifespans, hacking our biology, and insulating our finances against every conceivable market downturn.
It's a multi-billion-dollar industry built on fear.
Yeah. And at a certain point, the original goal, which was just to be healthy enough to enjoy your life, gets completely lost. The protection of life ceases to be a means to an end. It becomes the final goal. But desire is natural, right? We have to want things in order to survive.
We do. But that is exactly the shift these texts are warning against. It is the transition into what the sources term disordered desire. The evolutionary software we rely on to avoid predators gets hijacked by abstract existential dread.
So it goes from avoiding a tiger to avoiding, like, the concept of aging.
Precisely. We are no longer satisfied with being reasonably prepared for the probable challenges of life. We start demanding an impossible, absolute certainty against all vulnerabilities.
Which is wild because that doesn't exist.
Right. But we still want it. We want ironclad guarantees against aging, against accidents, against economic collapse, betrayal, and ultimately, death.
But the cruelty of that is that absolute certainty really is just a myth. I mean, you can have $10 million in a diversified portfolio, you can eat a perfectly optimized Mediterranean diet, and live in a gated community, and...
And a genetic mutation or a distracted driver can still end everything on a random Tuesday.
Exactly. It's terrifying, but it's true.
Which is why the psychological loop becomes so vicious. The texts outline a cycle that is actually incredibly recognizable to modern neuroscience. It begins with a baseline fear.
Okay, so you feel afraid. Then what?
To mitigate that fear, you gather resources and you secure yourself. For a brief window, you experience this dopamine hit of relief. Like, okay, I'm safe now.
But it doesn't last.
It never lasts.
Yeah.
Because your brain is wired for absolute security, which, as we just said, is fundamentally unattainable. That relief just evaporates. You quickly perceive a new vulnerability, a new threat.
So you're right back where you started.
Worse, actually, because this triggers an even stronger, more desperate need for security. The cycle just accelerates. Fear, securing oneself, fleeting relief, new threat, stronger need.
It's basically the hedonic treadmill, but for anxiety. You start out gathering resources so that you have the freedom to live your life, but eventually the psychology twists entirely. You find yourself living your life only in order to gather resources.
You become a servant to your own security system.
Yeah, you are no longer living in the house. You are just a full-time security guard patrolling the perimeter, day and night.
And that transition is what literally devours a person. The text makes this logic so clear. If your core drive is this disordered need to accumulate control and secure yourself against all threats, then even if you were handed infinite time and infinite resources, you still wouldn't find peace.
Because the problem isn't a lack of resources, it's the insatiability of the fear.
Exactly. Infinite time would just be an endless runway for your insatiability. The very instinct meant to serve your survival gradually consumes your entire capacity to experience the life you're actually trying to save.
That perfectly contextualizes that famous line from Matthew 16, for what will it profit them if they gain the whole world but forfeit their life? Historically, I've always heard that framed as like a moral threat.
Right, like a wagging finger from the sky.
Yeah, like don't be greedy or God will punish you.
But looking at the source material, it's not a moral threat at all. It is a brilliant psychological observation. Gaining the whole world is functionally useless if the process of gaining it destroys your capacity to interact with it.
Precisely. You could achieve absolute protection and infinite wealth, but if you are entirely driven by the fear of losing it, you are completely psychologically paralyzed.
You're frozen. Right. You can't share your wealth because sharing diminishes your hoard. You can't build deep relationships because true connection requires profound vulnerability, which is the very thing your disordered self-preservation has sworn to eliminate. You end up with full barns and a completely empty existence.
So, if hyper-optimizing our lives and building higher walls just traps us in this vicious cycle of fear, how do we actually handle the fact that we are vulnerable? Because, the threats are real. The economy really does crash. People do get sick. The storms are out there.
They absolutely are.
This is where the source material takes such a fascinating pivot, bringing in a completely different cultural lens to solve the exact same problem.
Yes, this is where we turn to the Hagakure. The text offers this stunningly pragmatic metaphor for navigating inevitable adversity. It describes a person out walking who gets caught in a sudden, heavy rainstorm.
A very relatable scenario.
Right. Naturally, their immediate instinct is self-preservation. They don't want to get soaked. So they start running frantically along the road, darting from eave to eave, hugging the sides of buildings, sprinting through puddles, expending massive amounts of energy just to stay dry.
But the rain is blowing sideways, and the eaves aren't wide enough. The outcome is entirely predictable, isn't it?
They get completely soaked anyway. The samurai lesson drawn from this is profound in its simplicity. It says that if you are resolved from the beginning that you will get wet in a rainstorm, you will not be perplexed or panicked.
You just accept it.
Yes. You will still get the exact same soaking, but your mind will remain entirely at ease. And the text concludes with this massive philosophical claim. It says, this understanding extends to all things.
Extends to all things.
Oh.
Wow, that is a complete paradigm shift. Because if we look at our modern behaviors, we are constantly hopping from eve to eve. We use money as an eve. We use social status, thinking if we just curate a perfect reputation, we can't be touched by criticism or rejection.
Oh, absolutely.
We use helicopter parenting, trying to micromanage our kids' environment so they never experience failure. We are just sprinting down the road, exhausting ourselves, desperately trying not to get wet.
And the tragic irony is that none of these eves actually remove human vulnerability. No amount of money prevents a terminal diagnosis. No amount of social status prevents heartbreak. Every single human being eventually gets wet in some way.
It's unavoidable.
What the Hagakure is arguing is that our panicked, confused resistance to the inevitable actually amplifies our suffering. We suffered the rain, yes, but we also suffer the exhaustion of running from it.
But I want to push back on this a little, or at least clarify it for the listener,
Sure.
because there's a danger of misinterpreting this as just like fatalism. The text isn't saying, well, it's raining, so I might as well go lie down in a ditch and drown. Accepting vulnerability isn't the same as passivity, right? We are still supposed to act.
Absolutely not. The samurai were not passive. They were intensely active and disciplined people. The metaphor doesn't suggest it's wrong to wear a raincoat or seek reasonable shelter if it's available.
Okay, so what is it targeting?
It is targeting the panicked resistance to things that cannot be controlled. Accepting that you are going to get wet is actually a massive release of internal resources. Think about the sheer cognitive bandwidth, the time, the anxiety, and the money that is consumed by running frantically from eve to eve.
It's exhausting just thinking about it, honestly.
Right. When you stop fighting the reality of your own vulnerability, you reclaim all of that wasted energy. You are no longer spending 90% of your mental capacity trying to eliminate every possible drop of rain.
And when you stop sprinting in a panic, your vision actually clears. Like, if I'm not desperately looking for the next eve to hide under, I might actually notice the person standing in the rain next to me. I might have the presence of mind to share my umbrella, or just, laugh with them about how absurdly wet we both are. The acceptance of vulnerability is what reconnects us to the rest of humanity.
Which perfectly resolves the paradox we started with. The drive to save your life at all costs isolates you. Accepting that your life cannot be perfectly saved frees you to actually live it alongside others.
That is so powerful.
But this naturally raises the next critical question in our sources. Once you accept the rain and free up all this mental and emotional energy, what are you supposed to actually do with it?
Because if you just take all that freed up energy and sit on it out of lingering fear, you've just created a different kind of trap. And this is brilliantly illustrated in the next piece of source material we are looking at. The parable of the talents.
Yes. The parable of the talents offers a masterful psychological portrait of fear acting as a brake on human development. The narrative involves a master who goes on a journey and entrusts his property to his servants.
He hands out these talents.
Right. He distributes talents, which in the ancient world were incredibly large sums of money representing vast capital. Two of the servants take this capital, invest it in the real world, take risks, and double the initial amount.
But the third servant completely short-circuits. He doesn't invest it. He doesn't even put it in the bank for baseline interest. He digs a hole in the ground and buries it. And when the master returns, the servant's defense is the most revealing part of the whole story. He says, "I was afraid, and I went and hid your talent in the ground."
I was afraid. That is the operative phrase. What is fascinating here is that the servant is not accused of malice. He didn't burn the money. He didn't squander it on reckless living.
He wasn't a bad guy, necessarily.
Exactly. From a highly distorted, hyper-conservative view of self-preservation, he acted in the safest, most logical way possible. He eliminated all risk of market fluctuation. He experienced zero loss. He returned the exact capital he was given.
So what does this all mean? Because by eliminating all risk, he eliminated all potential. He completely withheld the future that could have grown from that capital. And I think this is where the listener really needs to pay attention, because we are not talking about ancient Roman currency here.
No, we are talking about human potential.
We are talking about time, ability, relationships, and attention.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the texts view life itself as an enormous entrusted capital. You are given a specific allocation of years, a specific set of talents, a specific capacity for love and creativity. This capital is not given to you merely so you can preserve it in pristine condition until the day you die.
I see this playing out constantly in modern culture, especially around major life choices. There is this paralyzing fear of making the quote-unquote wrong choice. So people just refuse to choose.
They just hover in a state of indecision.
Yeah, they keep all their options open indefinitely. They won't commit to a career path because it might be the wrong one. They won't commit to a partner because someone more compatible might come along on an app. They hoard their emotional capital because investing it in someone else risks the pain of rejection or loss.
And that is the modern equivalent of burying the talent in the dirt. Keeping your options open indefinitely is an illusion. It actually means you are choosing nothing. You avoid the risk of a bad investment, sure, but the opportunity cost is your entire life. You might reach the end of your days and proudly state that your heart was never broken, your reputation was never tarnished, and your savings account was never depleted. You didn't crash the car.
But you never took the car out of the garage. You never went anywhere.
Exactly. The profound tragedy highlighted in this text isn't just the literal loss of biological life. The ultimate tragedy is receiving the staggering, beautiful gift of existence, and out of a panicked instinct for self-preservation, never actually using it. The talent isn't destroyed, it is simply withheld from the world.
Locking your life in a safe just so you can endlessly verify that it's still there. I mean, it's a miserable way to exist. So if hoarding our life out of fear is the ultimate failure, how do we properly invest it? How do we transition from being the person building a bunker to the person actively engaging with the world? The text shifts gears here, moving away from economic metaphors into something much more visceral and biological.
It moves to the metaphor of the seed and the soil, specifically looking at John 12:24. The text states, "Unless a grain of wheat falls into the earth and dies, it remains just a single grain. But if it dies, it bears much fruit."
This isn't just poetic imagery. It's a precise biological reality that perfectly maps onto human psychology.
Mhm.
Think about the physical structure of a grain of wheat. It has a hard, impermeable, protective outer shell.
A literal armor.
Right. If you put that grain in a glass jar and set it on a shelf in a climate-controlled room, it will remain perfectly safe.
Yeah.
It is executing self-preservation flawlessly. It remains a single, intact, undamaged grain.
But it remains entirely alone, and it remains dormant. The biological truth of the seed is that its protective shell, while absolutely necessary for a time, eventually becomes the very thing preventing its destiny.
It traps it.
Yes. For the hidden potential inside that grain to be unleashed, a violent disruption has to occur. It has to fall into the dark, damp earth. It has to be exposed to moisture, to dirt, to pressure. The protective shell literally has to rot and break apart.
To an outside observer who doesn't understand botany, it looks like destruction. It looks like the seed is just dying.
But what appears to be the death of the original form is actually the fulfillment of the life contained within it. The life inside the seed doesn't vanish. It reorganizes. It passes into roots. It pushes up a stem. It multiplies into an entire ear of grain. The philosophical insight here is crucial. The grain does not lose its life by opening itself to the soil. It only loses the closedness that prevented its life from expanding.
Oh, wow. It only loses the closedness. That is a brilliant way to frame it. But translating this from botany to humanity, what exactly is the soil in this metaphor? What is the human equivalent of the dirt and moisture that breaks open our protective shells?
The soil represents the messy, unpredictable, vulnerable reality of human solidarity. It is the real world of relationships, needs, and suffering. You cannot undergo this transformation in isolation. You can sit in a room by yourself and read endless books about empathy and love, but that is just a seed thinking about growing.
Right, it's theoretical.
Exactly. The actual transformation only occurs when you allow your protective shell to be fractured by the concrete needs of other people.
So the soil is the aging parent who requires hours of your week just to get to their medical appointments. The soil is the friend going through a brutal divorce who needs you to just sit with them in their grief. It's the community project that is disorganized and frustrating, but desperately needs your specific skills.
Yes. The soil is often incredibly inconvenient. It doesn't fit neatly into a hyper-optimized schedule. It demands patience you feel you don't have. It exposes you to the risk of being taken for granted.
And right there is where the friction happens for me. Because if I'm listening to this, my evolutionary alarm bells are ringing. My self-preservation instinct is saying, if I let my shell break open, if I start absorbing the suffering and needs of everyone around me, I'm going to be depleted.
It feels like a threat.
It does. I'm going to be used up and destroyed by other people's problems. How do we reconcile this call for radical openness with the very real danger of burnout and exploitation?
That pushback is entirely valid, and the text addresses it through the concept of emunah. This is a Hebrew term that translates roughly to steadfast trust, faithfulness, or a deep-seated reliance on truth. A person operating out of immuna does not abolish their instinct for self-preservation.
They don't just give up.
Right. They don't become a passive doormat or neglect their own physical and mental needs. What they do is expand the boundary of their self-preservation.
Expanded how?
Yeah.
Because how do you expand self-preservation without just becoming, selfish?
By redefining what constitutes the self that actually needs preserving. When you operate in solidarity, your protective shell opens so that your hidden greatness can take a wider form. You still prioritize your health, you still sleep, you still build financial reserves, but you no longer do these things to construct a private fortress against the world.
You do them for a different reason.
Yes, you do them so that you have the endurance and resources to carry shared responsibilities. The internal mantra fundamentally shifts. It evolves from the isolated panic of "I must save myself" to the grounded responsibility of "we must protect the life entrusted to us."
That is a massive psychological pivot. We must protect the life entrusted to us. It means my survival is no longer a solo project. I recognize that my well-being depends on the farmers, the sanitation workers, the doctors, and the teachers in my community. But equally, I recognize that my own life, my resources, and my stability are meant to serve as a protective network for someone else. I am allowing the soil of human solidarity to break open my individual shell.
And when you allow that to happen, when the grain of wheat actually takes root in the soil of mutual responsibility, what does it grow into? The source texts follow this biological progression to its logical conclusion, offering a metaphor that completely redefines our cultural understanding of success.
Here's where it gets really interesting. This is where we get to the parable of the mustard seed. The text describes it as the smallest of all seeds, an insignificant, easily overlooked speck. But when it is planted and grows, it becomes the greatest of shrubs. It becomes a massive tree, so that the birds of the air come and make nests in its branches.
This image stands in direct, radical opposition to how the world typically defines greatness. If you analyze human history, our default model for greatness is rooted in what the text would call the logic of Babel or Eden.
Okay, let's define those terms for the listener, because they are heavy archetypes. What is the logic of Babel and Eden?
The logic of Babel is the drive for technological and structural invulnerability. In the ancient myth, building a tower to heaven was an attempt to become untouchable, to engineer a society so high and fortified that even the gods couldn't flood it again. It is greatness defined as absolute independence and dominance. The logic of Eden, grasping the fruit to become quote-unquote like God, is the desire for ultimate autonomy, the desire to be the sole arbiter of reality, needing nothing and no one.
And we still worship that logic today. I mean, our cultural archetype of greatness is the self-made billionaire on a private island. It's the person who has amassed so much leverage, so much capital, and so much power that they are completely insulated from the consequences of the real world. They don't need anyone. They have risen above the ecosystem entirely.
Exactly. The worldly definition of greatness is upward mobility that leaves others behind. But the text presents an inverted model. True greatness, represented by the mustard tree, is not about isolating yourself in the stratosphere. True greatness is measured by your capacity to become an ecosystem for others.
That's a beautiful way to put it.
Your success is defined by the fact that your branches are strong enough to carry nests, your leaves are broad enough to provide shade, and your very existence creates a habitable home for fragile life.
Think about the people in your own life who embody this. We all know someone who functions like this tree. When you are around them, you don't feel intimidated by their success, you feel safe, you feel nourished. When you fail, their presence offers shade and forgiveness rather than judgment. They aren't constantly trying to prove they are better than you because their energy isn't directed toward ego preservation. Their energy is directed toward providing shelter.
And the paradox of how this tree grows is explicitly stated in the analysis. The path upward first leads downward. The seed must plunge into the dark, heavy earth before its crown can reach toward the sky. You cannot grow toward the heavens if you refuse to be planted in the dirt of human reality.
You cannot mimic the divine by hoarding power.
Precisely. In the theological framework of these texts, to be like God is not about the divinization of the human ego. It's not about absolute, untouchable control. It is about participating in the life-giving nature of reality itself. God, conceptually, is that which creates space for the existence of the other.
So we are meant to do the same.
Right. Therefore, a human being achieves their highest calling when their power becomes a shield for the weak, when their accumulated wealth becomes sustenance for the hungry, when their hard-earned time becomes a space where another person can heal.
You started out wanting to save one tiny, isolated grain of wheat, And by letting go of it, you are given the opportunity to become an entire field. It is a stunning, hopeful vision of human potential. But I had to pump the brakes here for a second.
Sure, what is it?
Because it is incredibly easy for us to sit in a climate-controlled studio and talk philosophically about being a sheltering tree and embracing the rain. It's easy to talk about solidarity when the disruptions to our lives are, manageable. But what happens when the rain isn't just a passing shower? What happens when it's a Category 5 hurricane?
Oh.
Because the sources we are analyzing do not shy away from the brutal, unfair realities of the world.
No, they certainly don't. And any philosophy of survival that ignores profound suffering is essentially useless. This brings us to the concept of natural evil. We are talking about the blind, indiscriminate catastrophes of reality. Earthquakes, tsunamis, genetic disorders, childhood leukemia, random accidents, and death.
And we need to be incredibly careful with how we handle this.
Yeah.
The texts we are studying do not fall into the trap of toxic positivity. They explicitly warn against trying to justify horrific events. You cannot look at a grieving mother or a community flattened by an earthquake and say, well, everything happens for a reason, or this is just an educational instrument for your spiritual growth.
That is just abhorrent.
It is. It's not just philosophically hollow. It is deeply cruel. Suffering, in and of itself, can traumatize, embitter, and destroy people. It's not inherently good.
That is a crucial distinction. The texts do not romanticize suffering at all. This raises an important question. If suffering isn't magically good, and if we cannot easily explain away the existence of natural evil, what function does it serve in this framework of self-preservation and human development?
Right. What does a devastating earthquake have to do with the growth of the mustard tree?
Natural evil serves as a brutal, undeniable shattering of the illusion of self-sufficiency. When a massive catastrophe strikes, it harshly reveals that the individual protective shell we spend our entire lives fortifying is utterly inadequate.
It's the ultimate reality check. I mean, you could be that billionaire on the private island. You can have the perfect diet, the perfect investment portfolio, and the most advanced security system money can buy. But if the tectonic plates shift beneath your feet, or a novel virus sweeps the globe, your isolated self-preservation means absolutely nothing.
Yeah.
You cannot single-handedly build a hospital from scratch. You cannot manufacture your own antibiotics, maintain a municipal water grid, and perform emergency surgery on yourself.
In the face of overwhelming existential danger, the biological truth becomes undeniable. A human being is not a self-sufficient island. We are a deeply interdependent species. Natural evil forces the realization that isolated self-preservation is a mathematical impossibility. It strips away our arrogance and calls us toward radical cooperation, not because the catastrophe itself is good, but because the sheer scale of the threat demands a unified response. You cannot save yourself alone.
And this naturally introduces another profound ancient metaphor from our sources, this time from the Apostle Paul in his first letter to the Corinthians. To describe this required level of cooperation, he uses the imagery of a physical, biological body. He writes, if one member suffers, all suffer together with it.
He is describing the community as an expanded organism of self-preservation. Think about the basic biology of how a human body survives. The organs do not operate on a logic of hoarding. The eye does not gather light only for its own benefit.
Right, it shares the vision with the brain.
The heart doesn't pump blood just to oxygenate its own muscle tissue. It expends energy to send that blood to the furthest extremities. The lungs don't hold on to oxygen in a panic. Every single cell and organ in a healthy body lives by receiving what it needs and immediately passing on what it gathers to sustain the whole.
It is the perfect antithesis to the disordered desire we talked about earlier. In the body of solidarity, my surplus strength exists to protect your current weakness. Your specialized knowledge compensates for my ignorance. If I have an abundance of resources today, I deploy them to help you survive your time of scarcity. Because the fundamental truth of the body is that tomorrow, I might be the one who falls. And when I fall, your continued presence is the only thing that will protect me.
This represents the ultimate maturation of the survival instinct. It evolves from the panicked, isolated cry of, I want to live, to the profound communal commitment that life must be protected among us.
But again, I have to challenge this based on observable human behavior. Because when we look at historical and modern disasters, supply chain breakdowns, pandemics, economic crashes, they do not always result in this beautiful, coordinated biological mutual care. Very often disasters trigger the exact opposite.
They absolutely can, yes.
They cause panic buying, they cause hoarding, they cause violence and scapegoating. People literally fight in grocery store aisles over basic necessities. Extreme suffering doesn't automatically make us enlightened, generous people.
Your observation is entirely accurate, and the philosophical framework of our texts agrees with you completely. The source material explicitly acknowledges that natural evil does not automatically transform someone into a person of imuna or deep trust. Catastrophe can just as easily drive people deeper into the bunkers of disordered self-preservation. Suffering is not magical soil that automatically produces good fruit.
So if the suffering itself isn't the soil, what is?
The true soil is the solidarity that responds to the suffering. The earthquake itself is devoid of moral goodness. What is profoundly good is a human being who risks their own safety to pull a stranger from the rubble. A terminal illness is not good. What is good is the community of researchers dedicating their lives to finding a cure, and the nurses who refuse to let the patient suffer alone. Famine is not good. What is good is the individual who unlocks their private storehouse and divides their bread with a starving neighbor.
I understand now. The soil isn't the pain. The soil is the relationship you actively choose to enter into because the pain exists. The grain of wheat matures not by being crushed by the tragedy, but by responding to the vulnerability of the world with radical openness and service.
Precisely. Natural evil exposes the ultimate inadequacy of the closed, isolated self. And in that terrifying exposure, the possibility of a wider, shared, resilient life appears. It is a choice to let the protective shell break.
Which brings us to the narrative climax of the text we are examining, and the ultimate final test of this entire philosophy of self-preservation. We've traced the logic from the rainstorm to the buried talents to the seed, the tree, and the shared body. All of these metaphors culminate in the central narrative of the biblical texts, the path to the cross and the redefinition of eternal life.
Yes. To fully grasp the psychology at play, we have to look at the immediate context of Jesus' statement in Matthew 16 about saving and losing one's life. He is explicitly discussing his own impending execution.
And looking at the text purely as a psychological and historical narrative, it presents a fascinating profile of a man facing the ultimate threat to his self-preservation. According to the narrative, Jesus is deeply distressed. He does not want to die. He isn't some stoic, detached figure welcoming pain. Yet he absolutely refuses to prioritize his biological safety above his calling. He refuses to save his life by betraying his core values of truth, mercy, and solidarity with the vulnerable.
He had numerous avenues for conventional self-preservation. He could have remained silent and retreated to a quiet life. He could have compromised his message to appease the political and religious authorities. He could have organized a violent, armed retaliation to protect himself.
And had he chosen any of those paths, he likely would have survived. He would have successfully, quote-unquote, saved his life in the narrowest biological sense that we discussed in the beginning.
But the text's argument is that in doing so, he would have destroyed the very essence of the life he was trying to save. He would have betrayed the image of God. He was attempting to reveal an image defined by self-giving love rather than coercive power.
This is a critical point to clarify for the listener because the idea of losing one's life has been dangerously misused throughout history. In this philosophical framework, losing your life does not mean throwing it away for nothing. It doesn't mean becoming a pawn for a manipulative political leader, or blowing yourself up for a fanatic ideology, or resigning yourself to abuse.
Not at all. The decisive phrase in the text is "for my sake," which, when mapped onto the life depicted in the Gospels, means losing your life for the sake of mercy, non-retaliation, and ultimate faithfulness to truth. It is not an act of self-hatred. It is, ironically, the highest recognition of your own value.
How so?
It is coming to the realization that my life, my consciousness, my capacity for love is far too valuable to be consumed solely in the pathetic project of protecting myself. The grain of wheat doesn't break open in the dark earth because it hates life. It breaks open because the life inside it is so potent that it demands to grow.
My life is far too valuable to be consumed solely in protecting myself. That is the defining thesis of this entire deep dive. And viewing the text through this lens completely redefines the concept of eternal life. If you ask the average person what eternal life means, they usually describe it as an infinite continuation of biological breathing, just endless, uninterrupted time.
But if you connect the concept of infinite time back to our very first discussion about disordered desire, eternal life becomes a horrifying prospect.
Exactly. If you are stuck in that dopamine loop of fear, always hungry for more security, always terrified that someone is going to take what you have, viewing every other human being as a competitor for scarce resources, and you extend that specific state of mind out to infinity, that is not paradise. Infinity combined with disordered desire is the literal definition of hell. It is an endless hunger that can never be satisfied.
Therefore, the text suggests that eternal life cannot merely be a measure of infinite duration. It must be a qualitative state of being that is actually capable of bearing infinity without collapsing into madness.
That makes total sense.
A person of immunique, someone whose protective shell has broken open into genuine solidarity, can bear infinity because the source of their joy has fundamentally shifted. Their joy no longer relies on consumption, hoarding, and isolated security. Their joy comes from giving.
They become the mustard tree. The tree doesn't panic. It receives water and sunlight, but it doesn't hoard them in a subterranean vault. It organically transforms those resources into leaves, fruit, and shade for the ecosystem. The tree's eternity isn't an infinite, heavily guarded private storehouse. Its eternity is its infinite, joyful participation in the flow of life. Because the more life flourishes around the tree, the more the tree rejoices. Its happiness is no longer threatened by the happiness or success of others.
Which is the ultimate, final rejection of panicked self-preservation. It is the realization that you are part of a whole and that your life is fulfilled not by guarding it, but by giving it.
We have covered a massive amount of philosophical, psychological, and historical ground today. We've moved from the neuroscience of fear to the theology of first-century texts and the pragmatism of 18th century samurai. But the incredible thing is how unified their underlying message is for you, the listener, trying to navigate your life today.
The unity of these diverse sources provides a powerful, coherent framework for understanding the human condition.
Let's trace that framework one more time. We started with the realization from Matthew 16 that making self-preservation your highest, absolute law will ironically destroy your capacity to actually experience life. Then, the samurai in the rainstorm taught us the vital practice of acceptance, that we don't have to panic over getting wet, and that accepting our vulnerability frees up enormous amounts of mental and emotional energy.
From there, the parable of the buried talent warned us against the tragedy of letting fear dictate our choices, reminding us that hoarding our gifts simply withholds our future. The biological metaphor of the grain of wheat proved that the true potential of our lives is only unleashed when we dare to leave our closed protective shells.
And leaving that shell requires the soil, which demands that we stop abstracting our lives and actually engage with the messy, concrete needs and suffering of the people around us. Because when we do, the mustard tree shows us that true human greatness isn't found in rising above others in absolute independence, but in becoming a sheltering home for them.
Finally, the harsh reality of natural evil proves that we are simply too fragile to survive as isolated individuals. Our biological instinct to survive must mature into a shared body of mutual protection and solidarity.
It fundamentally changes how you view your own life.
Right.
You are not a solitary consumer trying to outrun death. God, or the universe, or life itself, has entrusted you with a staggering amount of capital. Your time, your physical energy, your wealth, your unique talents, your capacity for empathy.
And the challenge posed by these ancient texts is to relentlessly examine your own instinct for self-preservation. Look at the resources you have accumulated. Are they acting as a fortress to keep the messy, unpredictable, vulnerable world out? Or are they acting as a storehouse designed to feed and shelter that world?
Because life is not a treasure meant to be buried in the dirt. It is a seed meant to be planted in it. It is a stream of water that stagnates and dies when you try to dam it up and keep it for yourself. But it comes alive and transforms the landscape when you let it flow onward.
It is a difficult, counterintuitive way to live, but it is the only way to avoid being consumed by your own fear.
Navigating this isn't easy. The diagnostic waters of human survival are muddy. It's not a clean X-ray. You can't just point to the break and fix it with a cast. Overcoming this paradox requires a daily, conscious choice to step out of the bunker, to unlock the safe, and to walk out into the rain.
So as you go back to your day, we want to leave you with this final, provocative thought to mull over. If your life right now is a seed, what exactly are you refusing to plant? And who, in this profoundly vulnerable world, is currently waiting for the shade of the tree you are always supposed to become?